You're looking at Kilmar Abrego Garcia, freed from immigration detention on a judge's order today. He fights to stay in the U.S., handing a major victory to the immigrant whose wrongful deportation to a notorious prison in El Salvador made a flashpoint of the Trump administration's immigration crackdown. This was a major story. A lot of you might recognize the face and or the headline, the ongoing headline. Abrego Garcia's attorney's office confirmed he was released just after 5 p.m. Today, the deadline the judge gave the government for an update on Abrego Garcia's release. His attorney, named Simon Sandoval Moschenberg, earlier told the Associated Press that Abrego Garcia plans to return to Maryland, where he has an American wife and child and where he's lived for years after originally immigrating to the U.S. illegally as a teenager. You know, this whole topic of legal versus illegal immigration has been in headlines for years. I've covered this topic as a journalist for many years, but this year we are seeing the back and forth as the Trump administration promised the greatest mass deportation when it comes to illegal immigrants in the country. We've been covering that ongoing headline. I want to bring in immigration attorney Renata Castro. I've talked to Renata several times before, interviewed her extensively for the Migrant in America series that I was working on during our migrant crisis. Hi, Renata, how are you? I can't hear Renata, but I want to hear her. Let's see. Hi, Renata.
It's great to be
There
here
she is.
speaking.
Yeah.
Great to be here speaking on immigration.
You know, we appreciate your valuable insight. And, you know, as an immigration attorney, you're offering us expertise, but you also have deep knowledge into a world that is changing. And also, I guess, when it comes to your clients, because you do work with clients, right? You're not handling this in an abstract way. You're working with clients, right? You're not teaching in a university, for example. You're seeing people's lives and uncertainty really affecting their lives. So I know you've been busy.
Yes, without question. You mentioned, being on the front lines. I was at a hearing this morning pleading with a judge in Philadelphia to grant my client more time, a client who is in the United States, married to a U.S. citizen, and during other times would have been afforded sufficient time for the government through the immigration agency to work its case. But now, every single time we have a judicial encounter, we have to abide or pursue the law, but also hope that the judge in front of us will understand that due process is not a matter of political partisanship, but one that built the American legal system.
Right. So when we're talking about Abrego Garcia, of course, you don't represent him, but I know you're familiar with this. I mean, this was a major story. So we've heard both sides of this, right? We know that the administration has said if you're in the country illegally, I mean, you shouldn't be here, and we're going to make sure to take care of that. I'm paraphrasing here, but when it comes to people who could be considered a threat with criminal backgrounds, we've heard the immigration say it's going to be criminals first. So they did say, and I'm saying they, but talking about the administration and, you know, the branches of government that handle this sort of thing, that there was a real reason to detain this individual and to carry out the process that happened thereafter. Of course, we're hearing this judge's ruling, which is interesting because it's going to be controversial. We've already heard from the administration, the Department of Homeland Security, sharply criticizing the judge's decision and vowing to appeal, calling the ruling a naked judicial activism by a judge appointed during the Obama administration. And look, we have seen different administrations handle immigration differently and illegal immigration, although if my memory serves me correct, former President Obama also did crack down on illegal immigration, probably in different ways. But nevertheless, when we look at this high profile case, Abrego Garcia has become a face of what is an ongoing back and forth battle, for a lack of better terms. How do you break this down?
This is almost like watching Real Housewives of Immigration Law because there's a surprise in every corner. Unfortunately, when we look at immigration law, there's a misconception that federal judges are engaging in judicial activism, when in fact, if you look at the order granted by this judge, she was almost surgical in precision when she said that she was not ruling on the merits of whether or not this person gets to stay in the United States. She was solely ruling on whether or not the extended detention period of this individual, who I have to say has not received a deportation order, is warranted. So imagine, to put in criminal law terms, someone being put on death row, but they have never been in front of a jury of their peers. So everyone in the United States is innocent until proven guilty. That is the basis of our legal system, and that applies to every area of law. So what this judge said to the federal government was, I am not saying you can't deport him. What I'm saying is you cannot keep him in extended detention. He's been in detention for months. And the government said that the only reason why he was in detention is because he wanted to be certain that he could be, or that he would be removed from the United States, deported. But the challenge is
Because they're saying
there
he was
is
a
no
liability,
deportation.
right? Just to break it down. Like they're saying he had to be in detention because we want to ensure that we can carry the process out and deport him. They said he has a criminal background, that he's a danger essentially to the public. I'm paraphrasing here, but basically that's what they're saying. Look, we got to keep this guy in detention because we need to make sure we send him back to his homeland, so to speak, right? That's what they're saying.
Yes, but the caveat here is, and the basis of this judicial order is that there is no removal order. An immigration judge has not ruled on whether or not, even if this man is convicted of a criminal charge, and let's be mindful that running a red light is a criminal charge. So we have to allow the courts, immigration, federal, and criminal, to do their work. But is it warranted to keep this man in detention? So it's very important that for attorneys in general, whether or not we're looking at immigration law or criminal law, that we understand and that we educate the public on the importance of due process. And in my legal opinion, this judge was basically confining her decision to the record and to the lack of evidentiary support by the government, that their position that this man had to be in detention because he was going to be deported was supported. They didn't have the removal order, and that's why Abrego Garcia was released
So
today. I'm sure this family is very happy with this Christmas gift, but their battle is far from over.
yeah, the battle continues for sure. We've already heard the administration say that it will be appealing this. But so he was being held at a detention center in Pennsylvania. Um, the deportation to the prison, so that had happened, and then they brought him back, or
So he was removed to a high security. His case became a poster child used by
right?
the administration to show that they could do whatever they wanted to anyone as long as they were an immigrant or justified in immigration law. He was removed to, I believe, El Salvador, to
Yes,
one of the world's most dangerous detention
they
centers.
call it one of the most dangerous facilities. Yeah.
Yes. So his family, and I have to give kudos to his American citizen wife who has been fighting this battle. I cannot imagine the pressure that she is under.
Yeah,
So
she's a
he was
mom
brought,
too.
she's a mom, and you know what? I am sure that when we look at the record, it's very important that we look at the record. We need to understand that a man that did not have a deportation order has been removed from the United States. The government defied other judicial rulings and showed that it thought it could do whatever it wanted to an immigrant. But now the federal courts are saying, yes, you have the right to deport anybody you want as long as you follow due process and you show your work, show the
So
record, and comply with due process at all
So
times.
Abrego Garcia, and of course, there's a lot of minutia that goes into anything that has to do with the judicial system, including immigration, as you know all too well, Renata. You're there going through the minutia for multiple clients all the time. So he's there, he's brought back. Now he's being held in Pennsylvania. And now we know he's released. He's going back to his home in Maryland, where he has we know an American wife and children. However, he has said, or it has been confirmed, that he came to the United States illegally as a teenager. Now that means, I mean, we can inference crossing the border is coming to the United States illegally. Now, without getting into all the hard details of his specific situation, typically we've seen that, for years and years, people cross the border, usually the southern border. Most recently, I've covered stories, people crossing the northern border. They request asylum, or they come in some other way. Now, there could be different reasons. So we know that this happened. This administration, and this is the big shift, right? That's changed when it comes to the United States, is saying, look, you've already committed a crime when you come in here illegally, and that alone means we can get you out, right? And so that's what we're hearing this administration say. Now, of course, for years and years, this concept in the United States has been, we will accommodate if you're seeking asylum, you can seek a refuge here. So we've seen a clear shift. Anyone in the system, though, including many of your clients, Abrego Garcia, when I say in the system, I mean that's already here or this has already happened. It's like there's a huge shift of uncertainty that comes with those changes in Washington, D.C.
I think that the shift really is more in relation to, it's important to know that individuals who come through the border cannot be detained criminally if they entered the United States through the border and are pursuing asylum. There is the federal crime of reentry if you've been deported and reentered, but it is a crime to come to the United States through the border and not or and bring a family member. That could be, or an individual, that could be a crime of human trafficking. When we look at immigration law, anytime someone says this person entered illegally, what it really means is this person entered without inspection. If you are seeking asylum, the law is unequivocal. You must present yourself at a port of entry. Now, based on my experience, if Abrego Garcia came as a teenager, it is very unlikely that he had agency, that he had the ability to tell his parents whether or not he wanted to come. The
So this is
parents
a
said, "We're
factor that
going."
would be considered within an immigration case. You're saying, like, did this person have agency? Were they a minor? These are all things. So elaborating it outside of his case, these are all factors when it comes to the rulings in immigration court, right? Is that what you're saying?
Yes, it must. And now another step is that in previous administrations, you mentioned the Obama administration, and Obama was really the one that, in fact, deported the largest number, not invited people to leave through self-deportation, but actually deported individuals. His nickname was Deporter in Chief. Even during the Obama administration, there was a preservation of due process. And in the case of Abrego Garcia, he is married to a U.S. citizen, and he would be allowed to seek a waiver, a carve out, based on the fact that he has a qualifying relationship to a U.S. citizen.
So
That is the law.
So that's another question I had. It just seems, I mean, I don't know how long he's been married to this U.S. citizen, but they should have been able to at least start the process, right? Of course, now the federal government is saying that the Department of Homeland Security is saying that he's essentially a national security threat, and that term can be used for anybody who's considered to have a criminal background. So I guess there's two types of narratives here, because somebody might think, okay, if he's married to an American, like, why didn't he move the paperwork through, right? Is it more difficult now for anybody, I mean, elaborating outside of this just topic in general, to even be able to do something like that?
It is certainly more difficult. And having represented a lot of individuals in a similar situation to Abrego Garcia, I think that when children are brought to the United States and they're raised here and they speak English and they're well acclimated, a lot of times they fail to neglect how vulnerable they are legally in the United States as they navigate life. And once it becomes apparent that yes, they must go ahead and start a process that I must say is very costly. And I can understand why sometimes an individual will procrastinate or put off starting that petition. And then in his case, it became apparent that he had to start doing it. And he just, he was at the wrong place at the wrong time. Cases like
Mm-hmm.
his are approved and people receive their green cards throughout the United States. And unfortunately, this family was, randomly selected by the US government to be made an example. And as a result, I cannot imagine how, the uncertainty that they're feeling and other families are feeling because you mentioned his entry in the United States without a visa, and individuals call it entering illegally. We are seeing people, we immigration attorneys throughout the United States are seeing people who entered with a visa, don't have a criminal record, married to US citizens, doing the right thing and pursuing their green cards, be randomly arrested at immigration interviews, something that has never happened before. So there is no rhyme or reason. It is unfortunately a matter of the US government choosing, I'm going to say, the theatrics of detention, because yes, the government has the right, has the ability, and should pursue criminal charges to those who commit crimes.
Right.
But entering the United States and marrying a US citizen is not a crime that warrants detention at the very high expense to the US taxpayer.
But if the government is saying that he could have criminal ties, is there an extra layer to this? Because of course, if you're in immigration court, could you end up with a separate case in criminal? I mean, so how does that work, right? Because that actually makes it more complex. Like just to kind of explain it to everyone watching tonight.
So if you're an immigrant and you're pursuing an immigration benefit, or you're in front of an immigration judge and you're defending yourself of the possibility of deportation, criminal charges run parallel to your immigration case. However, the
Parallel, as
immigration
in separate courts, or as in so
separate courts,
it
separate
cannot come
courts,
up in immigration court.
it will come up in immigration court.
So it
And in
will,
immigration court,
right?
we actually have the blessing and the curse that we don't really have limitations on admission of evidence. So hearsay, for example, is admissible in immigration court. An immigration judge has a lot of discretion in making a ruling. So depending on the accusation of the type of crime and the evidence that the government presents in the criminal case in a separate court, the immigration judge can actually make a ruling based on discretion and analyze the circumstances and say, this person is not going to be forgiven for
Right.
the accusation of the crime. And I'm going to emphasize the accusation of a crime. In certain cases, a conviction is needed, but they are able to make that determination. So the immigration judge has a lot of leeway. And now, when we look at the next layer of the immigration appellate court, the Board of Immigration Appeals, we have an even more conservative, I think is the right word, panel that has been really, really hard on appellate decisions. So the immigration judge would have to make a ruling in this case that is so egregious that it would border on discrimination.
Right.
So I think we're going to be speaking a lot about Abrego Garcia, and I my heart is with this attorney that's representing him tooth and nail, because he is fighting a battle against the US government that it is, because of the notoriety of this case, it's a
Yeah,
much
it's a high
higher.
profile case for sure. As an immigration though attorney though, Renata, I have to ask you this question. If the government says that they believe a person is a national security threat, and that's whether it's the Trump administration, another administration, etc., does that give, I mean, at the end of the day, that's the law of the land, so to speak, or not? I mean, so the question being is, if they're saying this individual is dangerous and this is why we had to do this, yes, there's due process, but what is the gray area, or how would you, take a case like this and discuss it in court, or break it down? Like, what's the gray area if you're not a citizen when it comes to due process?
Oh, you have to look at this individual's ties to the community, his past behavior, saying that someone is a national security threat just because they're an immigrant, it is really expanding on the concept of a national security threat. You have to show some level of evidence of imminent harm or the likelihood that this individual would act on threats. So, what are we looking at? Past behavior, and we're looking at circumstantial evidence. As far as we know, the government has not met its burden to show that Abrego Garcia is someone who is engaged in a life of crime or has killed somebody or is in the process of plotting some kind of violent event. Based on the circumstances and the limited information that we have, this really has been a case where the government expanded its discretionary powers and is really grabbing onto this case to make a point.
So
However,
we know Renata, he's back in Maryland with his family. What are
yes,
your, tapping into your expertise, what do you think we could see next with this?
if I had to make a, I don't want to call it a prediction, but it really is.
Yeah, an
I have
educated
a
guess. What do you think?
I like that, an educated
Yeah.
guess. I think his immigration case is going to probably land in the hands of the most conservative judge in Maryland, and it'll be a very, very tough battle to show that this man it should be granted the opportunity to live in the United States.
Immigration attorney Renata Castro, thank you for being with us today on Newsroom Live. We really appreciate your time.